So Shabbat Shalom, Chag Urim Sameach, Chag Urim Sameach, the holiday of lights. Have a joyful holiday of lights. Because it's not Chag Hanukkah Sameach. Chag means festival, where there are a lot of sacrifices brought to the temple. But historically, the question is, why was Hanukkah, here I'm going off on a lesson now. Why was Hanukkah 8 days? We know the story of the oil, but in all likelihood, by the time the Maccabees were able to clear the temple, acquire the temple, clear it, and rededicate it, they had missed Sukkot. So they observed Sukkot. And that's what became the standard for the 8 days of Hanukkah. See? So you can't say you didn't learn something. Speaking of Hanukkah, we light candles. Why? How do you understand? You don't have to give me a textbook reason, but what to you does it mean to light candles at this holiday? Please, Carol.
I don't do it every night. once a week for Shabbat, but it's special. It's something special. It's different. Why is this night different?
Exactly. It's like Pesach. Yes, it's special. There's a specialness that is added to our homes when we light candles. Why do we light candles on Hanukkah, Shifra?
For me, light it's light, bring light to my life, but the light is especially because the shamash, like the other candle, another because it's fire, it's like that. You spread it around, you're not losing it on.
Beautiful. I love that. So what Shifra said is that when you light the Chanukiah, you light it with a shamash. The shamash is the helper candle. And what is mysterious about it is that the flame of the shamash does not diminish, even though it's lighting other candles. Light does not diminish when it is spread. You have a canteen of water and you share it with others, you're sharing life, but there's less and less in your canteen. Not with light. And she says it's like love. You spread love, you don't have less in yourself. There's only more in the world. Beautiful. If I were smart, I'd say Shabbat Shalom and walk off the bima because I can't get better than that. But I'm not so smart. There's obviously a reason why Hanukkah is a seasonal holiday. It comes at this period of time, like so many cultures. It is a culture of light in protest of the darkness, because the darkness makes us anxious. The darkness is somehow scary, rightfully. The more we light, the more we see. And with the more that we see, hopefully, the more we can navigate toward the good. What we also know about light, however, is that it illuminates obstructions to the good. And so when you turn on a light, it pushes away the darkness, but it only really pushes away the surface darkness, the fog. What light cannot do is push away the actual obstructions to goodness. And those obstructions, in relationship to the light, create shadow. It's an interesting metaphor for the human psyche. There are certain things that we can very easily react to. Somebody turns on a light and you go, okay, we can react to things very immediately. But the things that are harder to change are the shadow. We might take immediate offense to something a favored politician will do. And we can express that offense. Oh, it's terrible. But come election day, it's sometimes harder to change our political affiliation, our party affiliation. It takes much more to address that. Our change sometimes is glacial in its speed. So we have a lot to take a look at. In our Parsha, we have the example of Jacob and his family, Joseph and his brothers. Jacob begins the Parsha attempting to settle down. And if you've been following along, you know that he's had a quite adventuresome life. He was the image of anxiety, which is why he struggled with the angel of God, and he didn't give up. No matter how much anxiety he suffered, he didn't give up. He grappled all night, and for that he was rewarded with a new name, Israel. But you see, immediately he's still called Jacob. We often may achieve certain accomplishments, but some things need to continuously be fought for in order to maintain that achievement. And so Jacob settles, probably without a very settled mind, because immediately he sees between all the children of all of his wives, there is a lot of disquiet. There is a lot of dysfunction. What he did was he didn't just father a nation, he fathered a household of politics. The children clearly do not inherit the hard-won wisdom of the parent. The parent, though, not only has to survive the path, the journey of one's own life, they also have to figure out how to become educators. And Jacob is an example of one who did not know how to educate. What we see is the politics between the brothers is the brothers did what they did out in the fields, and Joseph would bring back reports of their actions to their father. Joseph was the spotlight to the brothers and brought back these reports of where they fell short. In other words, it wasn't just enough that God's prophecy of blessing to Jacob was fulfilled in the fact that he had children. His children also cast shadows, and Joseph was the one that revealed that. The brothers did not appreciate having Joseph shine a light on them. They were jealous of Jacob's love for their brother, this preferential love that was apparent in the coat of many colors, and yes, that's why I'm wearing this talit. They were so incensed, so broken by Joseph and what he did by shining a light on them. They responded with, Velo yachlu dabro leshalom. They could not speak a friendly word to him. But if you look at the literal translation, dabro leshalom, they could not speak words of peace or peacefully with him. It was a broken family. In fact, there was no sense of family. And there is more. Joseph would bring back tidings, bad tidings of his brothers to their father. And Jacob's response was to do nothing. He said nothing. Now, following Joseph conveying his imperious dreams to his family, where the sheaves of wheat stood up and bowed before him, and the stars bowed before him, all representing his family. You didn't need Dr. Freud to make that clear. What did Jacob respond with? Ve'aviv shamar et hadavar. His father kept the matter in mind, is how it's translated in our Torah, but a hyperliteral translation would be, his father kept his words. Shamar et hadavar, which means word. He kept quiet. Holding back honest speech, holding back honest rebuke is what leads to real dysfunction in a family, in a community, and in a society. If we cannot speak clearly and openly, if words are considered such violence that we're not allowed to utter them, then it doesn't take very long before dysfunction will reign. Having our own shadows illuminated before us is not fun. It's hard and is the essence of spiritual growth. And you know my line about people who are into spiritual growth, they're masochists. To have your shadows spoken to you, revealed, is a primal act of goodness. Because only with recognizing where the shadow is can we even begin to address it. That's the purpose that Joseph served in his family. And we see that the story, however, between Joseph and his brothers doesn't rest on being broken in this dysfunction. It continues and it churns through many years. If you're not familiar with the story, Joseph is sold by his brothers into slavery. Worse, they make their father believe that he was torn by beasts and killed. And they let their father believe that his son was dead. And it carries on. Joseph eventually gets sold, rises, gets thrown in jail, in a dungeon, is forgotten in the darkness, but he doesn't give up his faith, which must have served as a light, and he comes out and is revealed to be an interpreter of dreams. Joseph the dreamer interprets the Pharaoh's dreams. The Pharaoh's impressed enough to bring him out of the dungeon and elevate him to the highest office in the land under the Pharaoh. And from that position was able to not only consolidate Egypt's power in the world, but also save the lives of multitudes by having the wisdom to store the grain for the dark days ahead. And then he re-meets his brothers, and his brothers don't recognize him. They come back together, spoiler alert. Why? Because Judah had to speak the truth to the image of power. We cannot go back and bring Benjamin. We cannot leave him here. It will kill our father. We already caused him the death of one son. We cannot let him experience the death of another. The truth came out. And from that point forward, Joseph reveals himself, and they reconnect as a family. What this reveals is that if there are bonds that weave between us, we can survive the shadow. We can survive dysfunction. We can survive being wrong. And we will eventually come through, woven ever more strongly together. And that, my friends, is the message for us with regard to what is we are witnessing if we're paying attention to the state of Israel. I have to commend to you a book that came out just recently. It came out actually just before October 7th. It's called The Genius of Israel by Dan Signor and Saul Singer, who together authored the great book Startup Nation. They observe that, and came out before October 7th, they observe that despite the kinds of disunity and dysfunction in Israel, the protests that were pushing Israel to the brink of potential civil war, 40 weeks of protests, sustained protests, has not been seen in any democratic country in the world. What they claimed is that the bonds of family run so deeply among the Jews and among Israelis in particular that they didn't know what was going to happen, but they did expect Israel to become unified eventually. They describe on these evenings of protests, which became institutions in the culture, people, those that protested for the judicial reforms were in one city, and those that protested against them were in another city. Let's call them Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And so people, of course, on Saturday night, went to their respective protests, and on the way back, they met each other regularly at the escalator at the train station. And so, of course, as escalators do, one goes down, the other goes up, and they're right next to each other. They observed that not only did both, for and against, wear the same flag around their shoulders, like a talit, I might add, which is the basis for the flag of Israel. If you notice the two stripes on top, it's based on a talit. They not only wore the same flag, I don't know why I get emotional when I think of this. When they crossed each other at the escalator, they shook hands. They screamed at each other, "I love you. You're wrong, but I love you. You have no idea how much I love you." Can you imagine that taking place in the United States today? And that's what breaks my heart. Americans don't look at one another as we're American first and Republican or Democrat second. When hordes of us leave California for Texas, when hordes of people move to other states just so that they don't have to talk divrei shalom with one another, there is less and less light because we're seeing fewer and fewer shadows around us. And what does that do? Make us believe that everything is fine and that the other side is not only wrong but evil. Shame on all of us for letting that happen. Now, at some future sermon, I will speak more about Zionism and Americanism. But imagine, since we light candles also to ignite our own imaginations of what the world could look like by bringing more light to it. Imagine, because I have no fear of what's going to be in Israel. I have pain and anguish over what has happened. But I have no fear about Israel's future, because the bonds between Jews in Israel, and I have to say increasingly between all Israelis, and I have to say including Israel's Arab population, the more we bring them in, the more Israeli they will be, is strong, and it's founded on a sense of family, shared commitment, shared history, shared destiny. If we as Americans can pay attention to that and try to remember what it was like to speak about an America that stood for something, warts and all. Yes, we have original sins, and they ought to be casting a shadow. But let's not turn off the lights so that we don't have to see the shadow. Let's be Joseph and look at them very carefully and say that we will not live in the shadow. Let's deal with it. And let us not forget that America also stands for something greater than its history. It stands for an imagined destiny for all people, equal. Hanukkah is desperately needed by the world, not only because we share a cultural value of wanting to push away the anxieties that come with darkness by creating light. Hanukkah is a message, especially to America right now and to the world. The West has light to bring, and it is a function of enlightenment. It's a function of Western values to notice, pay attention, and point at the shadows. And we should have no fear, because our principles ought to be strong enough to inspire us to hold one another as members of a collective family, and in that way persevere. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom. Chag Urim Sameach. Speech. No, I'm kidding.
You gotta save it.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Mazal Tov. You can be seated.
Thank you.
Ta'amod. Careful for the kids. Yeah, we're the kids. We need the cleanup detail here.